Deep personal struggles can often leave us feeling trapped, unable to find a way to move forward. But with the right solutions, we can break free and find our way toward the center of calmness. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Center of Calmness. And today we have Nanda DeJager with us. Welcome, Nanda.
Thank you.
So glad you're here. Just curious, you were calling in from Brussels, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. From Belgium.
That's
It's 10 o'clock at night here now, so it's pretty dark.
Yeah. Glad you're able to take a few minutes for us so late in your evening. I did want to ask, how is the situation in Brussels these days?
It's rather strict, I would say. I think Belgium is one of the strictest countries in Europe. So in the capital here, it's masks everywhere you go, everywhere outside. So basically, except in your own house or your own garden. For the rest, it's all masks.
Wow, that's crazy. So even outside in public, everyone is masked and unable to just fully express themselves, right? That's got to be very strange.
It's very strange. It's like, I think for everyone, it's like your life flipped around and you're like, okay, how did we get here and where are we going to go from here? But it's an interesting year for sure.
No doubt about that. No shortage of surprises and a necessity to continuously adapt, right, to an ever-changing situation. Absolutely. All right. Well, glad that you're doing well yourself. And just wanted to kind of start rolling through a conversation of the Poems to Recovery book that you published. Did you publish that this year or last year?
This year. So, almost 2 months ago now.
Okay.
And it was released on Amazon end of July. I published a book, Poems of Recovery, about my recovery from an eating disorder and amenorrhea. And amenorrhea is the absence of your period. So I think 3 years ago, I didn't get my period, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. So at one point I was like, maybe I should change something. My body is clearly giving signals that, it's not going so well and it's shutting down vital functions. For me, it was due to the fact that I was over-exercising and under-eating. And I've always had, I would say, an issue with eating. I always wanted to control what I ate. I ate at very specific times, had like food rules. But I never thought like that's something I should change because I was fine. I was used to it basically. And I always wanted to be skinnier and control those things until I lost my period. And then I was like, okay, maybe this is a little bit more serious than I thought. And then I started sharing poems of other people and quotes on Instagram because that's what a lot of people do, right? You repost on your stories. And then I got a lot of replies saying, oh, that was so helpful. Thank you for sharing. And I knew that journaling helped me a lot in my recovery process. And one of my friends had written a book. So I thought, okay, maybe instead of journaling, I can write some poems to express how I feel. And then in the end, publish it so that other people can learn from my experience and see that they are not alone in their process. Like there's unfortunately other people out there that are struggling with the same thing, but I was always thinking if I can help only one person with being vulnerable, opening up, or sharing my poems, that's enough.
Absolutely, right. Just to be able to have the opportunity to just touch one life makes the whole thing work. And I'm coming from the same avenue with my work with the chronic anxiety. I'm basically looking to just reach one, and if I can help them with my solution, it would be the same. It would be such a lift to my heart to be able to do that. Totally awesome. So if I could just delve into the solution of writing this poetry a little bit more. Of course, I definitely resonate with the thought of finding those comments that really resonate with you on Instagram or on Facebook, and the little pictures and memes that folks forward. Super encouraging and relatively easy to do, right? But what outside of that encouragement, what got you to move forward into creating those poems that you created, and then how did that process change your own recovery approach as you transition to that?
I think for me, it was really the process of looking into your own feelings and where do they come from, like finding the peace within yourself, interior, instead of finding it outside of yourself. But writing really helped me to let go as well, to kind of organize my thoughts in a way. Like if something would happen, I would write it down and then read it back and like, oh yeah, I felt this way before, or oh yeah, I felt like that before, but I'm not feeling that anymore. So it must mean that something changed and I grew. So it was a really healing process in itself to write and read it back, but it was also a big part of the healing journey to come out with my story and to admit, okay, there was a problem in the first place. I want to I want to break the mental health stigma because there's so many people that are struggling that don't talk about it. And even me, if I struggle, I still have a hard time talking about it. But I think admitting that and showing that can also help other people to feel more safe, to be more open and more vulnerable. Because in the end, okay, yes, you have to recover on your own. You really have to do it yourself, but you don't have to do it alone. Like there's so many people out there, so many great resources that, yeah, there's always someone out there to help, I feel.
Absolutely right. It's much more a community approach, and I feel that folks are, especially in these days, much more recognizing that none of us are perfect, and we none of us have the endurance or fortitude to get through these times alone, right? We need the support of each other, and especially folks that are undergoing the similar journeys to provide encouragement and support to keep moving forward. So I definitely appreciate that technique of writing down the thought and then reading it back to kind of re-internalize. Right now, just curious, when you write, do you use computers to write, or do you just write by hand? I've heard that there's benefits of each of those techniques. Do you find it's better to write by hand and also draw? I noticed that your book has some sketches in it as well. Do you find the drawing is also part of the process?
The drawings actually came afterwards, so they're made by one of my friends, based on pictures of me. I hope you don't have too much background noise, by the way, sorry. And
Okay.
the writing itself, it was really on my phone. So I had a Google Doc open, and then whenever I would go to bed, I would write a few poems if I felt like it, because I felt like the Google Doc thing I always had with me, because I always have my phone with me, right? So I always had an opportunity to write and to express myself. And I also noticed that if I would go on walks, sometimes poems would just come up. Then if I didn't have my phone, I was like, okay, but I need to write it out somewhere. So I just tried to repeat them and remember to write them down later. But it all came very naturally and just on my phone. And then
Excellent.
later, of course, I checked it in a Word document on my laptop to see if it still made sense, because sometimes things look different on your laptop than on your phone, for sure.
That's for sure. I definitely appreciate the convenience. With everyone, we all have our phones with us, right? And there's, if we don't have the notebook or the pen, that it's possible just to keep going and keep that written, right? Now, did you always write in poetry, or did you find that technique a little bit later in your process?
I found it later in my process. I knew one of my friends was journaling, and I also knew the process of like being thankful for things. So writing 3 things you're thankful for every day. But I always felt like writing took so much time. So I was like, oh, I'll do it another day. Until I was like, okay, no, you really have to sit down and write. And then I was like, yeah, but if I want to write something short, then poetry is probably the way to go, because it can be a few sentences or 10 sentences as long as you want. So I always written in a journal. Like I think I started 2 years ago. Before that, I didn't really write in a journal, but I found it so helpful. And then the poetry was more okay, this is really something I'm gonna publish if it feels good at the end.
Hmm.
But also the thought process behind, because I wanted things to rhyme in a certain way. So I also looked up a lot of things like what can fit well, how can it flow easily. But I must say it all came very naturally, and I think it's the same with when you journal. It comes to you very naturally. You just write whatever comes up. I
I
think that's the
see.
most helpful.
What I'm curious about in particular, though, is once you reach the point of writing the poetry and having it sounds like you developed a commitment early on that you might publish the work. And then you began to look into the structure of the poetry as you wrote it about these, very personal topics and personal perspectives, sub perspectives, if you will, on elements and views and angles of the topic you're writing about. How did you find that process of structural development as far as your recovery process? Did you find that to be helpful? Was it just a kind of a different channel, or was that part of the transformation in and of itself?
I'm not sure I fully get the question, but I just started writing what I felt at that point. But also, if old feelings came up from before, so I started writing last year in July until December. So I was having my period at one point. So it was really more, I would say, towards the end of recovery, but also really thinking like, okay, my body is healthy now, but my mind is still not there. So I'm like in this phase where I'm like, do I really want my period, or do I prefer to be skinny? Like, what am I going to choose? Like, really, those battles more inside. Um, because when I was really deep in it, I didn't want to admit that there was anything wrong. So at that point, I couldn't have written probably, because I was like, no, I'm fine. Like, my body is meant to be this way. There's no problem. And I think when I started writing, I was like, okay, there is a problem, and now it's time to talk about it, to write about it. Um, and the poems, the exact order in which they are in the book, that's the exact order in which I wrote them. I didn't change the order. I didn't change anything. I did put it in three phases, like healing, feeling, and living. So you can see at the beginning really this roller coaster, but then towards the end it gets more positive. It's more about self-love, like how can I be better to myself, I'm feeling great. But there's some poems that are very heavy, like I don't want to be here, I don't want to do this. But there's also poems like, oh my god, I'm dancing on the street, I never imagined in my life that I would be dancing on the street.
That is really cool. And so, if for folks that do read your book, really they're reading the timeline of your entire process, start to
Yeah.
finish, and all the ups and downs, the feelings in the moment. Wow, that's totally awesome. I really look forward I don't have a copy of the book yet, but I do look forward to reading this. It seems super deep. The samples I saw on your website were quite good. Just I was able
Thank
to
you.
super accessible. I was able to kind of get into the moment right away with those. So I thought they were great. So at what point did you decide? Okay, I've got a full timeline. The poems are solid, and we're ready to produce and take this message out to the world.
I was finished in December, I would say. I was working with a coach then, and I felt like December was really okay. We're ending this year, we're going to start something new. So it just, at one point, it felt finished, and I wanted to get it out. So then I sent it to the publisher, who has to validate the manuscript. And then 3 months later, I heard that it was accepted. And then we started working towards the launch date, because you have to reread if everything is correct. Then we started
Right.
adding the visuals. We picked the book cover. So those kind of things are also there. And I thought, that's the most difficult part. But actually, when it's published, when you have to market it, and when you have to come out with your story and show up, that's actually the most difficult part.
I would agree. Yeah, I'm trying to get a couple of books out myself. Some relatively short ones, but like you say, it seems like a Herculean effort, right? To just go through the writing process and distill your thoughts and make them flow, or I say make them, but allow them to flow in the correct way and to truly represent what your feelings and experiences were in those given moments. But yeah, now it's time to to get out there and really enliven it with your own perspectives, all of the marketing. So I used to fear that aspect at first, but I wonder now if that's really the joy of it. Right now, you have this book, and this is a chance for you to get yourself out there as well along with it, right?
Yeah, of course, it's like, it's nice if people want to chat or if they want to interview you, but of course it's also scary because part of an eating disorder, it's also you want to hide. Like, you don't want to be seen, you don't want to be out there, and suddenly I have this book, I'm emailing people, and then right, I have to show up too. Like, you have to do book signings or events, and I'm like, okay, this part, and you can't really let anybody else do it because it's your book, it's your journey. So in that sense, it's, I think the biggest part of my growth, my healing, really came when I published the book and when I had to talk about it and when I had to go revisit the past, talk about how I did it, what I did. I think that really, that was one of the biggest parts in also getting better and being recovered.
That's totally awesome. The process is still working within you, start to finish. Well, actually, it's not finished yet, right? It's still in the marketing phase.
I feel like it's, I was always like, oh, there is going to be this finish line and then you're done. And actually you're never finished, which is also a good thing because there's always more to learn. But it's also a realization like, okay, you have the label recovered, but it doesn't mean your old thoughts won't pop up, or it doesn't mean that you'll have days where you feel like, oh, maybe I'm going to go back there. You just don't do it anymore.
Right.
So that's very different, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a process of transformation, right? Moving on, but yet the memories are still there, and they still need to be dealt with. But it's life, right? Always progressing, always moving forward. So I wanted to ask then, if the audience out there is thinking about purchasing and reading your book, who would benefit most from learning more about your journey?
I think people are going either through the same thing, like people with an eating disorder, but even people who are on this journey of trying to love themselves more and trying to appreciate themselves more. Mm-hmm. But I've also had people reading it that have zero experience with eating disorders, and they read it and they were like, okay, now I can finally understand a little bit. Like people around, but also young girls. Like, everybody's so insecure nowadays, and I think we could all be a little bit nicer to ourselves instead of being busy all the time, expecting more, like really appreciating where we are as well.
Absolutely. And that's a very important mindset shift to kind of tamp down that self-critic, if you will, and just realize that we are who we are. And it's important for us to be able to express that and be as much as we can be the most we can be out here in this world as we live through our life, in our communities, in our work, in our families, with our friends, etc. So that's awesome. Yeah, a very open and wide audience potentially for your book. I look forward to folks catching this broadcast and finding their way to it. And I'll also be purchasing a copy. So I look forward to reading the whole.
Awesome. I'm super curious to hear what you think. I'm always curious.
I will send my feedback. Absolutely. I wanted to post your contact information in case the audience wish to get a hold of you and learn more. So you have an Instagram handle. It looks like it's Ananda with 3 additional A's.
Yeah, I'm super enthusiastic, right?
And I guess Ananda was taken, right, as a primary?
I don't remember anymore, actually, but I guess so, yes.
Okay, that's cool.
It's been a while since I made Instagram.
Yeah, I'm relatively new to it. In my experience, a lot of the regular handles that you might first select are somebody's already been there and picked them, right? But that's pretty cool. And then your website, Ananda De Jager. Am I saying that right? Okay. Yeah. Ananda De Jager, that's ANANDADEJAGER.com for those listening on the traditional podcast environment. Cool. So look forward to keeping in touch, Ananda. I very much appreciate our conversation here, and especially looking forward to reading your book.
Thank you very much, and talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Thanks again. Thanks for joining us here today at the Center of Calmness. And for the Center, I'm BK Warren.